Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1977. We're going to be taking a look at Little Feat and they're going to be playing through Dixie Chicken. And they are going to be backed up with Emmylou Harris and Bonnie Raitt on backing vocals. If you want to listen to those two ladies individually, they are on this channel somewhere as well, so you can check them out. But let's get these guys up on screen and see how they get on.
I'd like to introduce some folks who are going to be playing and singing with us tonight. Miss Emmylou Harris and Miss Bonnie Raitt and Mr. Jesse Winchester. I seen the bright lights of Memphis and the Commodore Hotel, and underneath the street lamp I met a Southern belle. Oh, she took me to the river where she cast a spell, and in that Southern moonlight she sang a song so well. If you be my Dixie Chicken, Tennessee lamb, we can walk together down Dixie land, down Dixie land. Been a year since you ran away. Guess that guitar player sure could play. She always liked to sing along. She's always dealing with the song. And one night in the lobby, of the Commodore Hotel, I chanced to meet a bartender who said he knew her well. And as he handed me a drink, he began to hum a song. All the boys there at the bar began to sing along. Be my Dixie Chicken, I'll be your Tennessee lamb. We can walk together down Dixie land, down Dixie land.
And there we have it. I was going to interrupt it a little bit earlier, but it's only 3 minutes and 17 in length, so I just let it go for that extra minute, but there's a lot to have a look at within this performance. This kind of track and song is just so dependent on your rhythm section. That's what makes or breaks it, because of the groove that we've got the whole time. I have mentioned in other videos about drummers who might push the tempo of a particular track, and if that would start to happen here, you'd lose that groove, and it is such a deep groove in this track, and it's really solid work by Richie Hayward on drums, by the way. And another thing you might have spotted is that when Lowell is playing his slide guitar solo, in terms of that main melody, Lowell George on slide guitar and vocals, in the background you'll see Richie supplying that high head voice line that's exactly the same melody. So it's really cool that he's throwing that in there, and that's something that Little Feat had the ability to do. They had guys that could sing throughout the band and supply backing vocals, so it made their sound so diverse and gave them so many options in terms of where they could take every song musically. And just to point out, when Lowell is playing that slide guitar melody, if he doesn't get that exactly right, you've got another guy behind you who's singing the melody. So you're going to get a hell of a clash if you're a little bit sharp or flat. And the same goes vocally. Those two lines melodically have got to match up perfectly, and they do. And I just want to point out on the mix side of things that unfortunately Emmylou Harris and Bonnie Raitt in the background aren't mixed into the sound, or if they are, it is really quiet. So it's rare that the Midnight Special have a bad mix of a performance, but the whole band was great here. It's just those backing vocals needed to be whopped up. If anything, make them just underneath Lowell's lead vocal, because those backing harmonies would have been great to hear just underneath, maybe 90% of that lead vocal, because they would have harmonized so well. Because if you have watched the other videos on those two ladies, you know that they can sing. And when I mentioned that solid rhythm section, we've also got Kenny Gradney on bass, who is solid throughout as well. Like I said, this performance is make or break with that rhythm section. Also, when we go into the guitar solo, unfortunately, we don't get a shot of the neck. Usually, again, on the Midnight Special, you'd have the shots that you want, particularly in the guitar solos, but it just so happened on this performance that we didn't get the shot of the neck, so we missed out on Paul Barrett's solo there. But when you listen to it, the technique that he has in there and those harmonics, they just sound so cool. He does 3 or 4 in a row that really sit in nicely, and then gets back to that melodic solo, and he's really locked in to the groove of the whole track within the solo, so it complements the track so well. And he's also got that hint of distortion on the sound, which means that when he goes to those pinched harmonics, it makes all the difference, because they really do cut through. He also just throws in those octaves of his lead notes, which is a really cool thing to hear as well, because it's a really stylized lead section. There's so much going on in there that's interesting, and it's a really short solo comparatively with the track, but he just throws in so much technique in there, but it adds to the solo musically, which is the most important thing. Here we've got this southern rock sound, blues rock, but also that swing in the groove. So we've got a combination of sounds here all coming together, and when you've got that backing, unfortunately we couldn't hear it from Bonnie Raitt, especially with that country twang, you've got this mingling of genres that give you something unique. And when we're looking at Lowell out front there, his silky smooth vocal that he could produce just stood up on its own, because it was a unique vocal, but it was so solid and had that southern rock sound to it, but it was so under control all the time. Let's not forget Lowell's songwriting. He was a multi-instrumentalist as well, and he could get into the studio and produce, and that's a totally different set of skills, which I do mention in other videos, that is totally separate to learning an instrument, playing and singing, to then be able to produce a record and have the ear for that. It's really a difficult thing to add to those other set of skills, but Lowell had that. And just explaining the spelling of feet being F-E-A-T, that's just a nod to the Beatles, who spelt their Beatles B-E-A rather than B-E-E. So that's all that is. But getting into how Lowell started and how he met Bill Payne, because Lowell was playing in Frank Zappa's Mother of Invention, and Bill auditioned for that band, but he didn't get in. But that's how they first met. And Frank Zappa sacked Lowell from his band, and there are a few theories as to why this happened. The most likely for me is that Frank said to Lowell that he was too good to just be in a backing band, and he should start his own band. And the reason that I think that is most likely is because Frank Zappa was then instrumental in getting Lowell signed to Warner Brothers Records. So in 1971, they released their self-titled album, Little Feat. And during the recording of Willin', unfortunately, Lowell hurt his hand or his finger, and I think it was with a model plane. I don't know how the accident happened, but it turned out that Ry Cooder played the slide guitar on that track, Willin'. And if you want to check out Ry Cooder, he's here as well. There's a video somewhere on this channel, and this was actually referenced on the Under the Radar album, which was released in 1998. On the picture, it's got a plane and a hand with a finger pointing on the tip of the plane, so maybe he got his finger caught in the propeller or something, I don't know, but that's what that album cover is referencing. So this first album and the second album, which was called Sailing Shoes, that was released in 1972, they both did really well critically, but unfortunately didn't do so well commercially. And Linda Ronstadt did a cover of Willin' on her album called Heart Like a Wheel, and you can check out Linda on this channel somewhere as well if you want to. But the sales just weren't there, unfortunately, with those first two albums. So they had their first split in 1972 after Sailing Shoes, but then they got back together in 1972. But this time they had 6 members rather than 4, and they brought in Paul Barrere, whose solo we just saw, and also Sam Clayton, who is on percussion here as well. And the bonus was everybody could provide backing vocals now if they needed it. So it really opened up the potential to take that sound to a totally different place. And with this album, Little Feat, they certainly did that. It went in a more funk direction than they had done previously. And this track, of course, is from the Dixie Chicken album, and around this time they did a lot of session work as a band, but also collaboratively with other artists. And in 1975 they released their album, which was more jazz rock influenced, and that was called The Last Record Album. And in 1977 they released Time Loves a Hero, and Lowell was still doing all of the production in the studio, but in terms of the songwriting, it started to diminish with this album because it went more in a jazz fusion direction, which I think Lowell wasn't particularly into as much. And in 1977, the same year, they released their live album, and that was called Waiting for Columbus. In 1979 is when Lowell released his solo album, and that was called Thanks, I'll Eat It Here. And the reason for releasing this album, he actually signed the contract for this album in 1975, and people have said that the reason was so that he could finance Little Feat, and that's why it took so long to release this solo album. Unfortunately, in the same year, 1979, in June, is when Lowell passed away. He died from a heart attack, which was linked with a cocaine overdose. I think he was living a lavish lifestyle in terms of doing drugs, and he also ate a lot. He was morbidly obese. It was a downhill spiral, really, from just a few years, considering that the video that we just watched is 1977. So the album Down on the Farm was finished and released after Lowell's death, and that's when there was a bit of a hiatus from the band, because it wasn't until 1987 that they got back into the swing of things, because they got Craig Fuller in on vocals, but he was also a songwriter as well, because they had gigged with Craig previously. They'd done a tour, so they knew that he had a great voice. So with the addition of Craig's songwriting and his vocals, they released Let It Roll in 1988, and this did really well because there was a single called Hate to Lose Your Lovin', which got to #1 in the rock charts, and the album went gold. So now the band were in the public's consciousness, they were getting a lot of exposure, and they appeared on Saturday Night Live, and the knock-on effect from this was that the earlier stuff with Lowell and Little Feat, the albums, started to sell. And just to give you an indication of how much they were selling, the live album that they released years earlier called Waiting for Columbus, that went platinum. With their album representing the Mambo in 1990, it was leaning a little bit more towards jazz, and I think Warner Brothers Records, who were the label at the time, weren't sure about this direction, so it was the last album that they did with Warner Brothers. In 1991, they released their album called Shake Me Up. In 1993, Craig left the band, and I think it was due to just spending so much time on tour that he wasn't spending a lot of time with his family, and he wanted to change that. Later on, he would join Pure Prairie League, and in 1993 is when Sean Murphy joined the band as well, and that was up until 2009. And just to mention that Little Feat are still going to this day. They are still touring. In fact, I've seen tour dates in 2020 advertised. So if you want to check out some Little Feat, you still can do in 2019 and 2020. But a vintage performance here from Little Feat and Lowell at the front of the stage. And even though at this time they weren't a massive band, Lowell was the kind of guy who was all about the music, just being a true artist, like I mentioned, having that skill set of being a producer, but also multi-instrumentalist and a singer and a songwriter. He had all of those skills, and he wasn't in it for the money. And it just so happens that a whole new audience would be able to check out Lowell and his songwriting after his death, with the upturn in fortunes that the bands experienced during that period. And it's great also that we can look back at videos like this and appreciate Little Feat back in 1977. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.